The Brown family, stars of the television show Alaskan Bush People, have faced many trials in the wilderness. However, none have been as heartbreaking as the situation now confronting Joshua Bam Bam Brown. As the second oldest son in the famed family, Joshua has received a sentence with consequences that may linger forever. Fans were blindsided by the revelation, as court documents have now exposed the extent of his legal troubles. This moment marks a turning point not just for Joshua, but possibly the end of the rustic lifestyle he once cherished. Before the courtroom drama, Joshua's world revolved around the vast Alaskan wilderness. Raised by Billy and Amy Brown, he grew up immersed in survival skills that most kids never had to learn. While others were preoccupied with schoolwork and electronics, Joshua was mastering the construction of makeshift shelters and learning to track animals across rugged terrain. The Browns deliberately lived off the grid for decades, crafting a unique life far from urban convenience. Patriarch Billy Brown valued freedom above all else, freedom from societal expectations, financial systems, and government bureaucracy. These values deeply influenced Joshua, nurturing a fiercely independent nature from his earliest years. In 2014, when the Discovery Channel began documenting the Browns, producers intended to showcase basic wilderness survival. But they captured much more: a resilient family bonded by love, persistence, and a shared struggle against harsh natural forces. Joshua quickly became a fan favorite for his calm demeanor, thoughtful decisions, and steady support of his family. While some of his siblings reacted impulsively, he consistently acted as a grounding force, which earned him the audience's admiration. Yet the fame also came with complications. The family's personal hardships became national discussion points. Their errors, ranging from trivial to serious, faced public judgment. As their reality blurred with their on-screen image, distinguishing authenticity from entertainment became difficult. One growing issue revolved around Alaska's Permanent Fund Dividend Program, which distributes a portion of the state's oil revenue to residents who maintain year-round residency. As the family's TV fame expanded, skeptics began questioning whether the Browns truly resided in Alaska. Observers pointed out discrepancies, timeline mismatches in the show and social media posts showing family members out of state during critical periods. Although the Browns claimed to live a nomadic bush lifestyle within Alaska, state investigators were beginning to develop a narrative that contradicted those claims. They suggested that the family had spent considerable time in the contiguous United States while still collecting state benefits intended only for full-time Alaskan residents. The scrutiny deepened when investigators reviewed credit card transactions, travel logs, and witness statements. They found that between 2009 and 2012, several Brown family members had spent more than 180 days a year outside of Alaska, rendering them ineligible for the dividends they had received. Joshua's case was especially concerning. As an adult, he had filed and signed the applications himself, swearing under penalty of perjury that he met the residency requirements. Each form included explicit warnings about the consequences of submitting false information. Investigators concluded that his statements did not reflect reality. Initially, the Browns dismissed the accusations. Billy Brown insisted that Alaska had always been their home, even if they occasionally left for short periods. Joshua supported that defense, arguing that their non-traditional lifestyle made the legal definition of residency difficult to apply. However, as more evidence emerged, the family's position became increasingly untenable. What began as simple inquiries into paperwork escalated into a full-blown fraud investigation. Alaska state authorities meticulously reviewed years' worth of documents, tracked movements, and conducted interviews. They found a consistent pattern: the Browns had collectively received over $20,000 in dividend payments during years when they were not eligible. Joshua, specifically, had taken in about $8,000 across 4 years. Though this amount might seem minor compared to the family's television income, prosecutors emphasized the principle behind the case. Alaska's dividend system is rooted in honesty, and abuses of that system erode public confidence and reduce the funds available for legitimate recipients. Adding to the complexity was the family's television exposure. As the show's popularity surged, episodes filmed in states like Oregon and Washington became unintentional evidence. Footage and production details from these locations clashed with their sworn residency claims. The show, which had once been a celebration of their remote lifestyle, had inadvertently created a documented trail for investigators. Joshua was in a particularly precarious situation. Unlike his younger siblings, who could argue they followed their parents' lead, he was a legal adult, fully responsible for the content of his filings. His name and signature were on every questionable application. As the investigation progressed, the case against Joshua strengthened. Prosecutors prepared to file charges of theft and falsification, both of which carry serious legal consequences, including possible jail time. For the Browns, who had built a reputation around living with honor and integrity, the idea of facing criminal charges wasn't just a legal problem. It called into question everything they stood for in the public eye. When the day came to face judgment, Joshua stepped into the Juneau courthouse, a stark contrast to his familiar wild surroundings. The polished floor and artificial lights replaced the earthy, star-filled wilderness he had always known. It was reportedly his first time wearing a formal suit, and the tight collar looked out of place on his rugged frame. Beside him, Billy Brown walked silently, his usual confidence subdued by the weight of the occasion. The father and son, once united against the elements, now braced themselves against the structure of the law. Inside, the courtroom atmosphere was tense. The judge, unmoved by celebrity, listened as prosecutors laid out the facts. According to them, this wasn't a simple clerical error. They claimed the Browns had knowingly and repeatedly filed false statements to receive money intended for true Alaskan residents facing steep living costs. Joshua's lawyer, however, asked for mercy. He highlighted Joshua's limited formal education and dependence on his father's guidance, urging the court to consider these factors in sentencing. Joshua Brown grew up in near isolation, raised with a deep belief in the primacy of family loyalty. So, when his father instructed him to sign certain documents, he did so without grasping the full legal ramifications. This defense subtly redirected blame toward his father, Billy, stirring quiet tension between the two men as they sat together at the defense table. Despite the scrutiny of cross-examination, Joshua remained calm. When questioned about why he signed residency forms despite being away from Alaska for long stretches, he answered, "My father taught me that home isn't just where you sleep. It's where your heart lives. Alaska has always been our true home, even when life pulled us elsewhere." Though emotionally resonant, his response failed to meet the legal definition of residency. The judge remained expressionless. The trial reached a turning point when prosecutors presented Joshua's signature on multiple permanent fund dividend applications. They matched these documents with dated photographs showing him in Washington state and California during times he claimed to be living in Alaska. This evidence directly contradicted the wilderness lifestyle the Browns had portrayed to the public. As the final exhibit was admitted, Joshua closed his eyes briefly, his shoulders sagging under the weight of the inevitable. A verdict loomed, one that would carry implications far beyond the courtroom. As the sentence was prepared, the room fell silent. Both prosecution and defense had made their final arguments, and the judgment was at hand. For Joshua, known to fans as Bam Bam, standing beside his father at the defendant's table, the moment marked the end of a long investigation that had peeled back the layers of their private lives for all to see. The judge began by outlining the charges, falsifying applications for state dividends and making unsworn false statements. The prosecution had presented compelling evidence, travel records showing long absences from Alaska, financial transactions in the lower 48 states, and witness accounts placing the Browns far from their declared residence. "The evidence is both compelling and conclusive," the judge declared. The defendants knowingly submitted applications containing false information about their residency, and thus received funds they were not legally entitled to under Alaska law. With those words, Joshua Brown was found guilty. The man who had built a career portraying authentic Alaskan wilderness life now stood convicted of deceiving the very state he professed to love. The irony of the situation was not lost on courtroom observers, many of whom later described the moment as deeply unsettling. The judge moved to sentencing with solemn precision. First came the jail term, 30 days without the possibility of early release or home confinement. For Joshua, whose life had been spent roaming Alaska's wild terrain, the notion of confinement represented more than punishment, it meant disconnection from the wilderness that had always defined him. The court acknowledges that incarceration may be particularly difficult for individuals used to unconventional lifestyles, the judge remarked. Nevertheless, the integrity of the permanent fund dividend program requires meaningful consequences for intentional violations. Financial penalties followed. Joshua was ordered to repay approximately $8,000 in misappropriated dividends, along with additional fines and court costs. In total, court documents showed he owed over $10,000. This was no small burden for a family that had lived modestly before finding fame on television. But beyond the financial blow, the repayment served as a symbolic gesture, an official acknowledgement that the money was never rightfully his. Among the spectators, some longtime Alaskans nodded in approval. The dividend fund, for many, represents a vital shared resource. Defrauding it isn't seen as a victimless crime, it's viewed as theft from the entire community. To further promote accountability, the court also imposed 40 hours of community service, to be completed within 6 months of release. This requirement was intended to foster rehabilitation, not just punishment, and offered Joshua an opportunity to make amends. He would need to return to Alaska to complete this work, reinforcing the message that restitution should benefit the very community he had misled. Community service is a chance to give back, the judge said. It allows for atonement in a way that transcends dollars and cents. Yet the most lasting element of the sentence came in the form of permanent ineligibility for future dividend payments. With that ruling, Joshua Brown was effectively barred for life from participating in a program that symbolizes Alaska's collective heritage. Long after the jail time ends and the debt is repaid, this ban will stand, a lifelong reminder of his mistake. Legal analysts later explained the significance of such a ban. Most sentences eventually expire, jail terms end, probation lifts, debts are paid. But this part of Joshua's punishment is irrevocable. No matter how many years he lives in Alaska or how cleanly he conducts himself, he will never again qualify for the state's annual dividend. According to the Anchorage Daily News, such permanent exclusions are rare and usually reserved for especially serious or repeated violations. The judge's decision suggested that Joshua's high profile and the prolonged nature of the deception played a role in the severity of the sentence. As Joshua stood for the final pronouncement, a subtle expression crossed his face, neither anger nor denial, but quiet resignation. The man once celebrated for braving bears and snowstorms now faced an entirely different kind of wilderness, a life reshaped by past decisions. As court officers stepped in to take custody of Joshua and Billy, they were allowed a brief moment to speak with family. Observers noted a short, quiet exchange with his mother, Amy, whose stoic presence stood out throughout the proceedings. Whatever was said between them remained private, one of the few family moments not captured for public view. When the handcuffs were secured, the weight of the situation seemed to settle fully on Joshua. The freedom he had long cherished was gone, and with it, a piece of his identity. Alaska, once the heart of his existence, had become the backdrop to a permanent rupture. This sentence was more than a consequence, it was a transformation. The fallout extended far beyond Joshua himself. The ripple effects of his conviction shook the Brown family to its core. With both Billy and Joshua removed from their leadership roles, remaining family members were forced to adapt quickly. What began as a legal challenge for one son of the Alaskan Bush People evolved into a full-blown family crisis, one that tested their resilience in ways that life off the grid never had. At Browntown, their handmade wilderness home, the practical difficulties mounted as fast as the emotional ones. Projects that would typically benefit from Joshua's mechanical expertise and knack for problem-solving were left incomplete. The family's boat, essential for travel and fishing in their remote area, developed engine issues that no one else could resolve with Joshua's accuracy. Routine upkeep became increasingly difficult without his insight. The generator that powered their basic electrical needs malfunctioned repeatedly, leading to dangerously cold nights. Bear tried to make repairs but lacked Joshua's methodical approach to machinery. Noah's inventive fixes were hit or miss, sometimes brilliant, but often unfit for immediate needs. Emotionally, the impact of Joshua's absence was just as severe. He had always been a steadying presence among his siblings, less reckless than Bear, more present than Matt, and more practical than Noah. Without him, the family dynamic shifted uncomfortably, leaving a gap no one could truly fill. Friends of the family noticed growing tension as the siblings tried to re-establish their roles in the face of this new reality. Bird took on extra cooking duties but found it hard to feed the hard-working group without Joshua's hunting contributions. Gabe stepped forward to lead, but frequently doubted decisions Joshua would have made with confidence. The Browns' usual sense of unity, central to their public image, began to show signs of stress. For Amy Brown, this period was especially challenging. She was already coping with significant health issues that would later prove serious, and now faced the emotional weight of both her husband and son being confined, something the family had intentionally structured their lives to avoid. Still, she projected calm strength, focusing on keeping the family together. But when the cameras were off, those close to her noticed she looked increasingly thin and worried, especially when Joshua's situation came up. A woman who had survived Alaskan storms was now facing a far more personal crisis, one that threatened the very core of the life she and Billy had built. The younger siblings, particularly Rain and Snowbird, struggled to come to terms with the situation. Raised in front of the cameras, they had little experience dealing with public scrutiny. Rain, affected by harsh online criticism of her brother's legal issues, temporarily deactivated her social media accounts. Snowbird distanced herself even further from people, immersing in nature and spending long days tracking animals to avoid human contact. The family's long-standing barrier between themselves and mainstream society had been breached, and the youngest Browns were hit the hardest by this new reality where their name now carried complicated associations. Financial strains soon compounded the family's challenges. Legal fees had already taken a toll even before sentencing, and with two key members unable to contribute either to the TV show or to their subsistence-based lifestyle, their economic future looked unstable. The filming schedule for Alaskan Bush People was disrupted, jeopardizing the source of their financial security. Producers scrambled to adjust storylines, sometimes avoiding any mention of Joshua, which led to noticeable inconsistencies that sharp-eyed viewers quickly caught. The combined legal costs for Billy and Joshua imposed a heavy financial load the family hadn't anticipated. Discovery Channel executives, too, were caught in unfamiliar territory. Their partnership with the Browns had been built on authenticity, centered on wilderness life and family values. Even a brief criminal sentence complicated that narrative. Would fans still be drawn to the Browns' adventures knowing this new background? Would sponsors continue their support? These questions loomed, unresolved. The family's land, once a symbol of security, became another source of stress. Property taxes came due during Joshua's incarceration, and without his contributions, cash flow problems arose. The Browns had always pooled their finances, functioning more like a collective than separate earners. Joshua's absence disrupted this balance. Bear suggested selling timber to raise quick funds, but the necessary equipment was the very kind Joshua used to maintain. Noah proposed crafting goods for tourists, but their production lacked consistency without Joshua's practical support. Even the family's fiercely guarded privacy began to erode. Locals, who once respected their boundaries, now felt emboldened to ask invasive questions about the legal issues. Some even showed up with cameras, hoping to capture sellable photos of a struggling family. This intrusion felt especially cruel for a group that had chosen seclusion to avoid such scrutiny. Bam Bam, who had once acted as their diplomatic bridge to outsiders, was also absent. Without him, the line between public curiosity and personal sorrow blurred dangerously. Then came the media storm. News of Joshua Brown's sentencing spread rapidly across entertainment outlets. Tabloid headlines screamed, "Alaskan Bush star sentenced, reality TV family faces real consequences, Joshua Brown, from wilderness to lockdown." Each outlet had its spin, but all zeroed in on the irony: a family known for freedom was now facing incarceration. Television reports paired dramatic voiceovers with scenes from the show, contrasting footage of Joshua building cabins with shots from the courtroom. Legal commentators weighed in on whether the punishment fit the crime, while former Alaska residents debated the significance of the state's dividend program and the seriousness of fraudulent claims. Fans were deeply divided. Many expressed feelings of betrayal, questioning the authenticity of the show. If the Browns weren't always living in Alaska, what else had been exaggerated? Comment sections filled with passionate arguments over the truthfulness of reality TV. Meanwhile, other fans stood by the family, insisting that small clerical mistakes shouldn't overshadow years of hard-earned, inspirational television. These supporters pointed to the Browns' real wilderness skills and family unity, asserting that their strengths remained intact despite legal setbacks. In response, Discovery Channel issued a carefully worded statement. They acknowledged the legal matter but reaffirmed their support for the show. Network reps clarified that the events took place before their partnership with the family and expressed confidence that the Browns would resolve things responsibly. Yet throughout the controversy, the Browns themselves remained almost entirely silent. No public statements, no social media posts, no interviews. This unusual quiet left room for rumors and speculation to flourish, further complicating the family's public story. The phrase "goodbye forever" took on a haunting meaning for Joshua Brown after his sentencing. The lifetime ban from Alaska's permanent fund dividend program wasn't just a financial blow. It was a deeply personal rejection. The dividend program, launched in 1982, was designed to ensure every Alaskan shared in the state's resource wealth. It had helped sustain the Browns during their lean years, covering winter necessities and equipment repairs. Being permanently excluded from this benefit was more than a loss of income, it was a symbolic exile. To the Browns, Alaska was more than a place. It was part of their identity. Being cut off from this program meant Joshua was, in the state's eyes, no longer a true Alaskan. This hurt him more than jail time or financial penalties. He'd grown up seeing Alaska as the foundation of who he was, a representation of independence and rugged perseverance. To be told that this connection was permanently severed left a wound that legal language couldn't describe. While confined, Joshua often turned to journaling. He filled pages with thoughts about identity, home, and what it means to belong. If the place that shapes you can later exclude you, what does that mean for the self you built around it? These philosophical questions lingered in his mind, more troubling than any physical hardship behind bars. What are your thoughts on Joshua Brown's legal ordeal? Would you have done anything differently in his shoes? Let us know your take in the comments, and thanks for watching. See you next time.